Okay, might be called away suddenly during this video, but we'll get what we can get. We're trying to record when we can. This is all rules. This is for the CvC. Delial versus Midas is Avalanche versus Brotherhood of Seed. The current score is 2-1 in favor of Brotherhood of Seed. Seto was able to beat Sir Smokes. I beat Addy in a really fun, interesting match you should check out because that was terrifying. Scary as hell. Great games. Um, and then in a really tight match, those were both 2-0s. Akiyama beat Tezuka 2-1 to give Brotherhood of Seed the lead. So we, the good guys, Avalanche, need Delial to come through here. Now he is 2-1-2A, which as we know is a terrible card, but let's check directions. And I probably do this more often when I haven't played much for a while, of like return to the basics, but it's good to do. Uh, what are our opponent's card strengths? I'm going to be presumably looking mostly from Deli's perspective for a couple reasons. One, rooting interest. Two, he's probably going to take more time on his move, so we're going to have more time looking from his perspective. But either way, it is his turn now, and when it's your turn, I think actually looking at the opponent's directional strengths is more useful than looking at your own. So I see sevens up, well supported by fours. I see sevens down. I see six to the left and seven to the right. But clearly, left and right is weaker. There are multiple sevens down, multiple sevens up, and clearly to the left is the weakest direction. I also noticed Deli's 4-6-6-5 and 5-6-6-4 are pretty redundant, and sadly, both of them are pretty useless to land in 1, as 2-5-7-6 is nice control. But I could see either one of them being a pretty decent starter in 7. If against any recapture in 4 you can play Trapdoor in 8 and they don't have a setup against it. They do have a setup against it, it's trickier. So for instance, if we start looking for what are cards Midas could play in 4 that set up a combo against 2-1-2A and 8. Well, I notice that 2-5-7-6 would need a 3 facing right, doesn't have it. 7-4-6-4 would need a 4 facing right. There are options like that. We'll come back to that. 7-4-6-5 needs a 3, don't have it. 6-7-4-5 needs a 1, doesn't have it. 6-2-7-5 needs a 4. So it's going to be something with a 4 to the right. And one thing I notice is both Midas's cards with a 4 to the right have a 7 facing up. And so Deli will have combo play in 1, which he shouldn't take immediately because he's comboed back, but it means it's hard for Midas to take that combo in 5 immediately if he sets it up. So I would be drawn, if I'm Deli, to playing one of the 6-6s in 7, saying, I don't think you taking in 4 is very good. I think I can lock in and be in a good situation. And if you go somewhere else, maybe I can go in 4 next turn and lock in my card in 7 essentially. And that sort of can give a free square in 1, but my trapdoor covers that well. So I would be looking to use Trapdoor's high number here and to try to make something that's a little tricky for Midas to take. And if Midas was to meet 7 and 9, right, 9 is the natural square to set up against because they can't take currently an 8, then I'm generally happy with the direction of the game. I think the rest of my hand is generally pretty happy to be going down. My remaining 6-6 likes going down. My 6-7-5-2, it's not its favorite thing. My 6-4-7-3 likes going down, and Trapdoor doesn't like anything, it's a garbage card. Alright, Deli plays one of those in 9. This makes good sense from a directional perspective. 3 cards in his hand are fairly happy to see him going in this direction. Does it create problems? Well, it sort of does as well. Yeah, I didn't consider this, but 6-7-4-5 is the only capture in 8, and that is comboed potentially, but very likely by 6-7-5-2 and 7. And if we look at Midas's captures in 6, 2 of them have a 7 facing up. That's vulnerable to 6-4-7-3. And so there's somewhat limited captures there as well. So, okay. This makes sense to me. I would tend to assume, I think like a starter like this or the one I wanted is a reasonable starter. It's not like I have a big advantage. It's not like I'm in huge trouble. There's a game to be played, and a lot depends on how stable a response my opponent finds. After a starter like the one I wanted or the one Deli played, I would generally assume that if Midas finds a move that clicks nicely, Midas probably has some advantage. If he can't really find something that's clean, Delhi has some advantage. Like the range of who's better here or whether it's equal very much depends on Midas's move. And I bet there are moves that are available that give some advantage, and moves that are available that are worse or in trouble. Um, but that's not to say there was a better starter available. It's just when this is the kind of starter you end up with, a lot depends on what the second turn player finds. All right, I'm receiving messages, so maybe some of them are in relation to the game. I will tell someone I am recording. So if you're Midas, there's a few approaches here. I think one is to look in a kind of interactional sense. What is my worst way of currently addressing this card? And Midas is a problem addressing the card in 8. Therefore, you could think I want to play in 5 or in 7 to set up new ways to deal with that 8 square, or 7 blocks the counter to your 8 square. There is also the way of I have a bad square, I want to remove it, so I'm going to play in 6, forcing my opponent to play in 8, and I will have removed that square from the game, right? There's things that say 8 is a problem and 8 is worth addressing. Now, how big you think a problem not having a good card for 8 is really dependent on like you and what you think of this position. For instance, the only reason 8 would be a serious problem is I have to go there. The only reason I'd really have to go there is if Delhi plays in 6. Now, if Delhi plays in 6, maybe I have options in 3, maybe I have options in 2 or somewhere else. I'm only thinking I really need to do this if I've decided there is a serious threat of Delhi going in 6. Now, sometimes something is not a threat now, but a few moves happen and suddenly not having a good card for 8 does become a problem. It can be worth addressing something before you see the reason you need to. But one way of looking at this, I think, would be addressing that. Another way would be I want to set up my cards maximally. So, for instance, if you saw a big setup in 5, you'd start looking at that. But it could also be something like there's not a great example within this hand, admittedly, but like something with a 7 down or 1 in 1 or 3, saying, I know I can combo this back, maybe especially in 3 where Delhi does not have the plus or plus wall. I am playing to set up my cards maximally. I think that's a reasonable way to think in this position as well. I think there is a split between players, and it's not players from both are good at finding moves of the other type, but there is a split between people who like to interact and people that are looking more for how their cards interact with their own cards, and people who are looking more for how their cards interact with cards on the board. And a move like this is very much not looking at interacting with what's on the board, it's leaving it alone, but it's saying, okay, maybe my 2576 or my 6275 can slide safely in 1 or 3. Seems like not in 1, but can in 3. And this, I think, it plays well with my cards. Is the argument being made? Is it a good argument? Well, maybe. Hmm. There's some funny lines here. Okay, we'll start calculating in a sec. But if I was gonna do like a style graph, and I've done them in the past, but if I was gonna do a style graph again, my current inclination would be interactive versus uninteractive. So a move like this is not interacting directly with the starter, right? A move in 1, in 2, or in 4 against a starter in 9 is a quite uninteractive starter. A move in 3, 7, 6, or 8 is usually immediately interacting and forcing action around that starter. A move in 5 might be somewhere in between. It's really going to depend on the specific move. But I would say the most interactive moves are 3, 6, 7, and 8, and the least are 1, 2, and 4. And 5 is a little dependent, a little in between. Um, where it could be like the most interactive move, but it could also not really be all that interactive. It's harder for me to categorize. And then the other would be kind of aggressive versus defensive. So the interactive uninteractive is how much are you looking to deal with cards on the opponent's cards on the board versus looking to set up your own cards and interact with your own cards on the board. And then the other axis I would have would be what I would term aggressive defensive. But I term this very differently to other people, right? Like when Deli says aggressive, he thinks about card flipping and immediately interacting, right? My sort of interacting versus non-interacting could be seen as almost the same, not quite the same. I think you'd have some differences, but quite similar to what someone else thinks aggressive versus defensive is. I don't define aggressive and defensive like that. Deli thinks of himself as a defensive player. I think of him as an aggressive player because we have such complete different definitions, which is why when I'm trying to explain my axes, I am not saying them in. I'm trying to explain my terms more than just say what I think the terms are. Because if I just say what the terms are, you will take something completely different away than what I'm trying to say, and quite possibly think, what is this idiot talking about? Because I've just said something that doesn't mean what I think I've implied from it, and because I didn't make clear what I meant from it, all my implications sound really stupid. And that's completely fair. So uh, I'm trying to focus on what I think the things mean. So for me, there is interactive versus uninteractive. And the second thing, and note when Deli played his weak corner starter, or the weak corner starter I was looking at, they were somewhat interactive weak corner starters, right? It was very much what are the ways my opponent can attack this card, and directly making sure I had responses to the ways it could be attacked. So it was a very interactive form of thinking. And obviously, we didn't think through Deli's move as much because I was talking about the move I was thinking about and talked less about the move he played. But I think he thought fairly interactively about this as well. But he might not have, right? The uninteractive way to think about this move is actually the first thing I said is all my cards or most of my hand is happy to be facing that downright direction, right? That my hand is pleased about this and it's not specifically looking at the direct interactions with the opponent's hand. So Stuff sends a message. I like the Midas move in 2, or Midas, I presume it's pronounced. I'm just going to keep saying Midas. I assume the idea was to create a safe spot for 2, 5, 7, 6, and 3. After Deli is no answer to that, but is it threatening? Yeah, I should have talked about this. I looked at moves in 1 because in 3 because I thought Midas's threat is to go in 3. Can Deli occupy it? And he doesn't have safety in 3. He does have some ways to set up combos in 5 against captures of 3 from 6, and he also has a plus wall in 1, which sometimes can combo through to 3. And we can see he does immediately get rid of 3. So Deli is immediately removing the squares his opponent can play on. I think both of Deli's moves in what I'm talking about, which doesn't have a lot to do with the game, but maybe is interesting to someone, are interactive moves. He is directly relating to what the opponent is doing, and you'll notice there's a plus in 6, there's multiple captures in 6, but with 6, 7, 5, 2 and 5, 6, 6, 4, he has pluses in reply against either 6, 7, 4, 5, and 6 or 6, 2, 7, 5, and 6. He is a same against 7, 4, 6, 4, and 6, and 2, 5, 7, 6 doesn't have a capture. So he is saying, I wanted to get rid of this square you have good play in, and I'm very interactively checking what it is. He is getting rid of Midas' squares, which will bring us to our next theme. But I would say Deli is playing this game quite interactively, and Midas so far is playing it quite uninteractively, which does not mean better or worse, right? I am a much more interactive thinker. Interactive moves tend to make sense to me. I think Seto is either more uninteractive or so deeply interactive that his moves look uninteractive to me, but actually they're just interacting at a really deep level. And it's probably some of both. But it means interactive moves are the moves that immediately make sense to me and that I'm drawn to. It doesn't mean they're inherently better. And lots of players go the other way. I think part of the reasons I found players like Jadot kind of mystifying is because he clearly organized his thinking in a different way. That doesn't mean Jadot wasn't a great player, right? So that's one of the axes. The other axis is what I think of as aggressive versus defensive, or the other axis I'd do if I was doing style now. And that would be, so we kind of have, how do you relate to cards on the board? Are you looking to directly interact with what they're doing? Or are you looking more to set up your own cards and squares for them, create squares for your cards? And then the secondary way, or aggressive versus defensive, I think of, are you playing more for the cards in hand or for the cards on the board? And this could be done interactively or uninteractively. For instance, imagine you have an AA corner that is just completely safe, or something like that. You have some big corner that's totally safe, a 7/7 they can't touch. The defensive move is to use that 7/7 and get its safe value quickly. The aggressive move is to hold on to that in your hand because presumably if it's not capturable, it also has a lot of captures available if the game's directed right. And so by organizing the game in the direction where it overpowers stuff, you can make sure it is a powerful capturing card. So we can use it for its immediate, this is useful on the board now value, or we can hold it in hand and use it to have options or restrict our opponent's options later, right? So both those moves are looking to do something. Both of it could be done interactively, right? You could imagine a situation where you can use it, or sorry, this move, we have a defensive or aggressive option, but within that, there could be other splits. For instance, right, if we said uninteractive, it could be used, right? I could use it in the safe corner. That is a defensive, uninteractive move. I'm not intending it to relate to my opponent's cards. I am playing it because it is safe in itself and my hand is happy to see that, right? That's obvious. That's a defensive, uninteractive move. But if I played some weak thing in the far corner to it, that might have no relation particularly to the opponent's cards. I'm saying I want to direct the game towards this so this card can sweep later. And I would deem that an aggressive move, right? I'm looking to maintain power. I'm looking to keep cards in my hand that have a lot of power that can control the game later, that I'm not taking the immediate payout of my card. I'm saving it for later. But I'm playing uninteractively, right? I'm looking to set up my cards. I'm not my main focus is where do my cards play well, not what is challenging to my opponent, what's hard for my opponent to take. So you can imagine decisions around that card that are aggressive or defensive, but both of those could be uninteractive moves. And similarly, both of those we could figure out a way they could both be interactive, right? We have these four options: defensive uninteractive, defensive interactive, aggressive uninteractive, and aggressive interactive. And there's definitely some overlap between those, but I think they really are four distinct categories, and being in one doesn't guarantee another. They're four distinct quadrants. Um, so in that spectrum, I think Deli is very good. You'll notice the two cards he used first are quite arguably the two weakest cards in his hand, right? It's a 2/1 2-way that has one direction it's good, but otherwise is complete trash. And one of his 6/6s, he's holding on to his 7/6s. Deli is very good about keeping his better cards for later. Uh, Deli is in this sense, and I would describe him as a very aggressive player, right? He is looking to maintain value in hand, often above achieving immediate value on the board. If we look at Midas, on the other hand, there's probably not really contrast here because all of Midas's cards were 7/6s and basically all 7/6/5s. It's very unclear which of his cards were better than others. He basically had 5 cards with very similar numbers on them, and there's not going to be as obvious a distinction there, but there were probably still choices that would have indicated something here. It seems like a hand where it's harder to indicate. But I would say on this front, Deli is quite an aggressive player, while I tend, in my interactivity, to be what I would define as somewhat defensive. It's not that I'm like using all my value immediately, but I think I am prone to use a value if it achieves an immediate interactive effect. And I'm usually looking to do things like that, with some, like, many exceptions, because I'm a good player, so my play is not locked into one thinking. And if that type of thinking isn't appealing, I usually am at least somewhat capable of adapting to that. So I think Delhi is a kind of aggressive interactive thinker, where I'm a more defensive interactive thinker. Midas, I think, is a more uninteractive thinker, and I'd probably define him on the defensive side with me. I think Midas is more defensive, uninteractive. And Midas's best skill is a defensive skill, and it's the same as my best skill, I think. Um, and this isn't quite how I'm evaluating offense and defense, but Midas is very good at taking difficult positions and finding a way to navigate them to a tie. Um, I think he does that really well, and I think it's a really valuable skill. Yeah, I was going to say, I'm presuming Delhi's going to go in 6 here. He creates a threat in 5. I didn't actually do any thinking, but you'll notice Midas has used a lot of right power. So he actually has very little capturing capability, and this fits in a bit with the discussion of defensive versus aggressive, where if you looked at Delhi's hand and said, the game is going to be facing upright, just from the start of the game, I told you the game's going to be facing upright, which cards do you want to hold on to? The answer is 6-7-5-2, and then either 5-6-6-4 or 6-4-7-3, depending a little on whether more up or more right was needed. Here we can see there's a threat of a same in 5. If Midas goes in 5 with 2-5-7-6, Delhi might be able to take a plus in 4. Yeah, if it happened immediately, he well, there's a combo back, but might be able to take a plus in 4. So Delhi has very much kept the cards you would want still in your hand if you knew the way the game was facing, right? This has been what I would deem aggressive play. He is not necessarily looking to do these immediate impactful things. In fact, every move he's played has had a fairly weak number facing out. He played a weak corner starter. He blocked 3 with the card with the lowest numbers facing out. Now, interactively, it was justified, and I think but it just as importantly got rid of a weak card. He has continually had weak things facing out. He has not kind of played for immediate impact. He has played to set up his future ability. I deem this aggressive play, but I think it has been highly interactive aggressive play. I don't know why I decided to talk about style today. It wasn't my intent at all. I was just going to look at the game, but that's what I feel like talking about, so that's what we're talking about. I think of Delhi as a interactive and highly aggressive player. Midas is kind of a style contrast in that sense, because I would put him on the defensive side, where I am as well, and as an uninteractive player. I think a lot of Brotherhood of Seed players are either more towards the uninteractive side, or I'm just not really evaluating what they're doing very well. Now, uninteractive might be the wrong word, but like more direct interactions. More like your moves are organized around capturing or what happens if capturing occurs, and organized around setting up there. So if you played moves that were like setting up maximum combo potential, I'd probably categorize that as more towards the uninteractive side, because you're often looking not to be taking immediately. You're looking to kind of set up for future value, but set up for future value based on your hand, not on the opponent's in a way. I'd probably call that uninteractive aggressive. Maybe a player like Vid or Vialva might fall into that mold. But I think most people would call that interactive, so I might be giving pretty bad labels to my terms. I hope they make some sense, though, to someone at least. Uh, Even if they're not the terms you would use or apply. I'm curious if other people have different words they'd use for them. But in general, I think Deli versus Midas is an interesting battle of style. But the most important thing to remember with style is anytime you see two very good players, they will make more moves in common compared to weaker players than they would if they're like two good players have more in common with each other than a good player and a much weaker player that have similar styles. I think this is just true. Like the gap in strength means some things are simply going to overlap and have to overlap. So I'm sort of expecting Midas to be able to play 2-5-7-6 in 5 here. I'm not entirely sure why he wouldn't be able to, but have I just not checked something thoroughly? Um, okay, he goes in 7, which usually suggests nothing normal was working. I didn't actually see the problem with 5, because if Deli takes the plus in 4, Midas has a plus wall in 7 that flips 4, flips 1, flips 2, and the combo stops there, so there's no big chain, and 6-7-5-2 is kind of dead on the last turn. And if Midas doesn't take 4, uh, if Deli doesn't take 4, Midas will have time to block it with, say, 7-4-6-4 with a 6 facing down that 6-4-7-3 can't combo. Or if Deli is 6-7-5-2, you block it with 6-2-7-5 with a 7 down that 6-7-5-2 can't combo. So I think 4 was fine. Sorry, 5 was fine. I think going 5 was fine, and that Deli should meet it with 6-7-5-2 and 4. Midas captures in 7, and Deli doesn't have a capture last turn with 8, leaving you with a tie. That's what I was thinking, but I was talking, so I wasn't calculating cleanly, so there's a very good chance I'm wrong. But it's also the kind of move that you can rule out immediately. You can be like, that gets comboed and I lose, on to the next move. All right, is Deli winning here? That is the question. So if Deli plays 6-7-5-2 and 4, which seems highly desirable, then Midas happily plays in 5 with a plus with 6-2-7-5, and he combos back and wins. If Deli plays 6-4-7-3 and 4, then Midas cannot play 6-2-7-5 and 5 because that only captures one thing back. He'll be down 7-3. If he plays 7-4-6-4 taking the plus, he flips almost everything and taking the same. Deli plays 6-7-5-2 and 8. He will be down 9-1 at that point, and he will flip back 9-5-2. And that's it. He loses 6-4. Okay, he can't play that way. What about moves in 5? If he takes the same in 5, he goes up 6-4. Midas can at worst play in 4. Deli has no captures with 6-7-5-2, tie. If he plays 6-7-5-2 and 5, there's no way he's winning that. So we're left with 8. If you play 6-4-7-3 and 8, you set up 6-7-5-2 and 5, but it's only to flip your own stuff. It's only to flip your own stuff. So even if Midas couldn't go in 5, which he might be able to, he could play 7-4-6-4 and 4, and 6-7-5-2 doesn't take anything. So then we're left with what about 6-7-5-2 and 8? And I think this is the best chance. But that looks like it doesn't work either, because the combo is bad. So I think Midas did find a tie here. And in fact, it wins in a lot of lines, so it's a kind of neat move. So yeah, nicely found. Kind of remarkable Deli isn't winning here when he gets the same in 5 and his card in 9 is safe. But I think Midas did a really nice job holding this. And we're not entirely sure my move in 5 held, so well played both ways. I'm going to put it in the database, and I have not received the message to do other things, so we're gonna put stuff in the database and keep watching. Interesting first game. Not sure it was the kind of conflict of styles I may have tried to sell it as. I did try to sell it as, but maybe it was. Maybe it was. Good game. So we have Delial 5-5 Midas. And our order was 4-6-6-5-9, 7-4-6-5-2, 2-1-2-A-3, 6-7-4-5-1, 5-6-6-4-6, 2-5-7-6-7, 6-4-7-3-5, 7-4-6-4-4, 6-7-5-2-8, and we'll have 6-2-7-5 remaining. Nice first game. Yeah, I think very well played. And we're waiting on the second. All right, Deli didn't love his starter, but I think it was reasonable. Yeah, I like how Deli handled that. He may have higher aspirations and moves than I do, but I think he got real pressure out of a weak corner into another weak corner, essentially. Yeah, all for how he played that. What else are we talking about today? I guess we're waiting on a game. I should not click that one. Yeah, and 7 actually was like a bunch of the lines I looked at there ended up being losing against it. Now, usually there will be some ways to lose, but moves that looked like they should be in good shape, Midas did a nice job of having combo play against everything. So moves that normally would be very appealing there could in fact be losing. All right, so Deli played on the account he didn't actually mean to. All right, that's fun. And Midas has first turn. Now I notice immediately Midas has 3 2s to the left. He has some synergies with those. You could see the 5-2-7-6 and 5-6-7-2 or 5-6-6-2 playing well. Deli has 3 2s to the left. Oh, geez. And a 3 and a 4. Ooh, so this is actually even worse for Deli than it is for Midas. That is rough. And that also means that Midas's likely kind of starter area is really hard for Deli to deal with. 6-6-7-2 and 6-7-5-2 give him coverage of 6s down, but not coverage of 7s. So the immediate question is 5-6-7-2 or 5-5-7-4 in one a problem? Now, one thing I'd note is Deli might have 2-7-7-4 and 2 as a response to anything in 1. It might be that we can all build out safely and just go from there. Are there setups in 5? Well, 5-6-6-3 sets up 4 against those starters, but it doesn't set up 2. And I don't think there's a good way to set up 2. Yeah. That could be really uncomfortable. And if Deli does have to play 2-7-7-4, note that is his highest power to the left. Now you might say, well, a 4 doesn't really matter here because there's not many 3s to take. But there's a couple, there's 1 3 in your own hand, there's a 2 in the opponent's hand. Having 1 4 to the left is worth something. I don't know though. It seems like 6-7-6-2 and 5-2-7-6 in Midas's hand are a huge problem for the good guys here. Because those cards cover a lot of potential pieces of safety we could get. And 5662. That's another one. There's a bunch of stuff that like can pick off numbers on its weak side that is very annoying. So I think this is going to be a tough game, and I think Midas probably should play in one. Right? Any kind of okay, I'm going to play in 9, so all my cards are happy. They make Deli's cards happy too. I don't think that's the way to be thinking here. Yeah, so Midas does go in 1. I thought this was the right card. Now, if Deli goes in 2, I think Midas just goes in 3 with a 7 facing out. Or at least that's the default move to look at. And that's just so annoying. God, I'm glad I'm not playing this game. This looks just very unpleasant. I would not be surprised if there was a very slim number of ties here. The thing is, with such a big left weakness, even if you thought, like, I'm killing it up down, which he's not, but even if you thought you were, it's still really hard to go in 8 because you don't even have a recapture from, like, 9. Um, Against 8, it's so easy for Midas to go 7 or something like 7, and maybe you can keep 7 controlled, maybe you have play there, but it's really easy not to. And if they can just go 7, it becomes a left facing game again, and your hand's so dead to that. So I would consider 8. I would consider 8 because you making it up down is worth something to you. You don't sweep them up down or anything. In fact, you're kind of getting swept by 6762 and 5662. But you just have no play side to side. It's even worse for you. So your better play is left right is up down, I mean. Could you play in 3? If you can play in 3 such that when they block 2, you have a nice thing to land in 6, setting up something in 5, then maybe you have real play there. But it's so clunky to take back anything you'd put in 3, and so much of what you'd take back with has 7s down that 5276 picks off on the right side. So 3 looks really ugly. There is a case for 6. I hate making the game side to side here, but you do control 3 and 9. And that's something. Like, you don't have much here, so you may as well have that. That's something. But even then, what card would you put there? What card would you put there? Like 5663 and 6? I don't know, man. Really hard to play 5. 2774 and 2, the problem is they go 3. You need a plan if they go 3, and that's not obvious at all. So 2774 and 2 says, like, I know this move does something good on the board, but next turn I'm going to have just as difficult a problem, and I'm just sort of postponing the issue. I think this is really bad. I think this is really bad. I might seriously consider 6. And I hate playing 6. I hate it. I really hate it. If you drop a weak corner in 9, it's just so easy for Midas to build out. He has the 5672 as well. That's just yeah, this looks truly Stuff is saying maybe there's an Akiyama 5 move, one of those moves where you only set up one way and you have a good response to them blocking. But the thing about this hand is, how would you have a good response to them blocking? So, for instance, first of all, you can't set up in 2, so you have to be setting up for 4. And if you play something like 5663 and 5 setting up 4, they play in 4 with a 7 down. You have no play against that, right? So it's not like a bad idea in a nothing remotely works. Let's think about something that I know is a fundamentally acceptable idea, but that isn't something you'd initially look for. That's a good thought. But here, I don't see why you'd have the tools. Deli goes for the weak corner. Yeah, I can't blame him. I can't blame him. But this seems so good for Midas. So good for Midas. Notice if Midas goes 5, 6, 7, 2, and 2, you don't even have safety in 3 anymore. I mean, like, whatever move Deli made, I was going to go, ugh, that's horrible. Because the position is horrible. I think I would have chucked something in 6. I think I would have played 5, 6, 6, 3, and 6. I hate it. I really hate this position. I am going to bring up the solver just to know if there were saves there. I bet there were. There usually are. And it's quite possible Deli found one because Deli is a miracle worker. But whatever it was, this looks horrible. Now, the coolest thing that could possibly happen would be if there was one tie and Deli just played it because he's a genius. And, like, that is not impossible. It's unlikely in the sense that, like, any specific thing here is unlikely, but it is no, like, more or less unlikely than anything else. So that would be really cool. If that happened, I'd be really excited. Odds are low, but I might have to quit in a moment. But let's see if we can get an eval here. It will take a little while to run. Okay, 2, 7, 7, 4, and 2 was losing. There was at least one tie. All right, we'll get to this shortly. But God, this is a horrible position. Um, so this move is losing. This move is losing. Okay, so there were more ties than I expected, but any move with 2, 7, 7, 4 lost. That's interesting. 7, 3, 7, 2, and 7 somehow tied. That is deranged. That is absolutely deranged. Like, they go 4 capturing. You presumably have to play 2, 7, 7, 4, and 8. Otherwise, what are we doing? That doesn't set up 5. No, that is so inhuman. Okay. That's a tie, but I'm going to scratch it. That's not a playable move. The more interesting thing is where there are more ties. There's that one tie in 7, but I think that's just so inhuman. But there are squares with multiple ties. There was one tie in 9. One tie in 9. And I think 9 was a reasonable try. Apparently you had to play 6, 7, 5, 2 in 9, which, like, why do you need to use that card rather than this card? That seems to have more unique values that you might want to hold on to in your hand. They have the exact same stuff out facing. Can you blame Deli for playing the, like, more human card to use there? Like, why? I don't understand why you'd need to keep 6, 6, 7, 2, but 6, 7, 5, 2 won't do it. Like, is it we need the 7 down? We have 2 more 7s down in our hand. Like, Deli's move is better from a human perspective than the tying move in 9. Which is to say, the 9 tie I don't think is human. The 7 tie I don't think is human. There is one tie in 3. No, there are 2 ties in 3. There are. Okay. So there are 3 squares with more than one tie. There was one tie in 7 that I don't believe in. There's one tie in 9 that I don't believe in. But there are 3 squares with more than one tie. And I think that's kind of educational here, right? Because those are the squares. This tells us these were the squares that there's some reason that stuff is more likely to work there, and that's where we should be looking more often. All right, Midas attacks it immediately, which is not my instinct. We'll return to that in a moment. but the three squares were 8, which I thought was possible but seemed really hard to get to work. 6, which is where I ended up. I ended up on 5, 6, 6, 3, and 6, which was a tie. And there were 3 cards that tied in 6. 6 was the most likely move to tie. I hate 6, but it seemed there was everything else was worse. And apparently that was right. And there were a couple ties in 3, which I think makes sense. Because if you're going to play an adjacent corner here, you have to play the one where you can build out an L. And the L's from 7 are horrible, despite it claiming there's one that holds. The L's from 3, you have some optionality. There's at least some dream of play there. But I didn't like that either. But I didn't like anything, right? So I'm kind of proud of myself that I identified 3, 6, 8, and 9, and that I didn't like 2. But how do you choose and which cards do you put there? Just identifying those squares are more likely to be good is a useful thing. But you still have to find a move there. And I mean, the move I officially said, like, I assume is just barely a hideously ugly tie. So Delhi plays a card in 9 that apparently is not the card in 9 that ties for reasons I just do not understand why this would lose and the other wouldn't. Now, I thought Midas should go in reply 5, 6, 7, 2, and 2. But apparently that doesn't win. There's multiple ties in 3 and a tie in 6. None of which makes obvious sense to me, but that is okay. Instead, for Midas to win, he had to build out in 4, not 2. There was one win, and it was in 4. He had to play 5, 6, 7, 2, not in 2 where I wanted it, but in 4. Now, 2 made sense to me because it was easy to control anything in 3, but actually it's easy to control anything in 7 as well, because you can plus, with that 2 facing out, both 6s and 7s. And so the only thing you can't plus is a 3, but you can take the 3, so you have good control of that. So 4 makes just as much sense. My instinct was 2. But very hard to distinguish 4 from 2, and Midas plays another move. Now apparently there are a lot of ties. Now apparently this is a playable position, but I would still assume this is very dangerous for Delhi. Because just because there are a bunch of ties, I would assume, given how narrow the path has been so far, that all of them are very close to being losses. And so I am still quite worried about this position. I will also note, even though Delhi's move in 9 technically wasn't a tie, if he does tie this, this is a great defense because this was a horrible position. And I think sometimes I focus a little too much on whether the solver says something holds, but whether you actually hold in practice is also really important. And there are clearly runs someone has where they get kind of lucky that no one spots and wins against them. But this is very early in the game. This is a complex position where the hands are really nonsensical and stupid. And if Delhi does manage to hold a tie here, regardless of whether he missed something, it's a fantastic defense. Okay, we're going to see this move. I'm going to solver check it because I'm lazy. And then I'm going to go see if I have to respond to messages. Delhi plays 7, 3, 7, 2 in 6. That can't be immediately comboed. Not only is this a tie, now Midas only has 2 ties. So I think this not only was a tie, but actually Delhi is probably pretty safe now. And Midas now has to make a good move, which suggests that 8 really wasn't the right way to press this position. That said, this is a ridiculous game for... And Delhi does this so often. This is a ridiculous game for Delhi to have held. Delhi should lose this game. He's not only going to hold it, but for the last few turns, it's going to... I mean, this is the critical move of the game, and now Midas has to find a hold. There are 2 holds here. There are 13 losses. Now, maybe those 2 holds are really obvious moves, but I'm going to suggest nothing is obvious in this position. Now, maybe it would seem more so if we had done more time actually calculating, but I think not only is Deli now safe, but Deli even says might be missing something but looks like a tie now because he never is 3 comfortably nor 5. Deli has immediately identified the 2 key squares. Me, having not done any thinking but having had the solver open, the only ties are in 3 and 5, and those are very uncomfortable to play. Any card in 5 walks into maybe plus walls in 2 if it has a 5 up, and definitely pluses in 4 regardless of which card he plays. If Midas plays in 3 and he has a 2 out, that concedes a plus in 2. And if he has a 6 out, it's still capturable, and it's capturable potentially with a 7 facing out that's safe. So Midas's only tie squares are now very uncomfortable, and Deli specifically knows those are the key squares, and I need to make those as uncomfortable as possible. He might have something somewhere else, but to make this as hard as possible for my opponent, I need to make the natural things to do as bad as I can. And he has done so. They're still the only squares where there's a tie, but now it's really difficult potentially for Midas to find. So, Deli's playing really good. And like Midas is probably not going to lose this game. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with what Midas has done. I think 8 was low pressure, and yeah, okay, he technically blew a win. So I think 8 was a bad move, but like Midas is going to have 2 ties here after he holds this, which he's probably going to do. Though again, now the pressure's on him, which really, 8, okay, 8, not a good move. But man, I really liked how Deli played the first game, and that he's like, if I had played this game, say I found 5 6 6 3 and 6 and committed, and I just barely held a tie, I'd be like, yes, I did great. I held a tie. I held an ugly tie with this garbage hand. Deli, on the other hand, is going to be like, I should have won when he doesn't win this. He's going to be like, I wonder if I missed something. And it's not that he should have won, but he's actually going to have been like close to the win. When if I was playing this, I would have been delighted to have held the tie. And he's so good at turning things around. And some of it is, I think it's kind of that interactive versus uninteractive difference. Where say I played 6, it's specifically because I control 3 and 9. I found somewhere on the board I can control. When Deli plays 9, he keeps the game vaguer. He's not making kind of any claims about specific squares. There's not a specific thing to it, and in some ways that makes it harder to play against, right? And so my way might, and this won't always be true, but this is an example where it kind of is. My way might be better for achieving a tie. I might have a higher chance to hold this game than Deli does. But Deli has a much higher chance to somehow win it. And that's crazy. That's crazy. Okay, I gotta check my messages to see if we're done here. But if Deli wins this game, oh my god. And just that Deli has a chance to win is nuts. Because again, Midas is really crazy good. He just came second in Ultimecia. I just played him a billion times wait, where did I receive a message? It's not showing up. I just played him a bazillion times for Kefka before withdrawing because I was stressed out and couldn't find him. And then he withdrew as well, so we both withdrew from Kefka. But we played really good games, and he played really well there, and I couldn't beat him. So, okay, message showed up. He does find a move in 5. Now, a move in 5 has a chance to be a tie, and this does look like he probably did find a tie. I didn't check what the moves were. But this looks like it would make sense as a way to hold. Because 2 7 7 4 and 4 is now covered by 5 6 6 2 in 7. Yeah. And so, for instance, one way the game could end is 2 7 7 4 and 2 makes it 5 5. Midas sticks something in 3, and Deli plays 5 6 6 3 and 4, and it just stays 5 5. There's no captures on the final moves. And if when Deli goes in 4, Midas in 2, Midas replies in 4, Deli has 7. If Midas goes 7, Deli is 4. So 2 is a pretty straightforward tie. Is there anything better? You could also start in 4, but I don't see why it would change things. I think starting in 2 or 4 is basically the same thing. You have safety in 2, you have safety in 4. At some point, you flip the card in 5, and you're on your way. Can you start in 7? Kind of ugly to figure out what you'd put there. I guess it would have to be 5, 6, 6, 3. But then they just take you, and again, 2 is tying. So I think we have found our way to a tie. Midas holds this nicely after reaching an actually tricky position. But what an insane thing to go from how bad this was to having actual winning chances. All right. Deli has picked up 6, 7, 5, 2, the one card I did not remotely consider, but it does make sense to land in 2. That's where I'd guess where he's putting it. And then he can, if Midas uses the wrong card in 3, he has the plus in 4, so he keeps open a little optionality, but most likely he's going to follow with 5, 6, 6, 3, and 4. This makes sense. Again, W is better at looking for what's a way I can get my opponent to screw up than I am. I'm going to congratulate Deli on this game. Wait up. Okay. Well, if 5662 takes that, all right, so Deli has been fancy again. If 5662 takes that, then you have the combo in 4 and you win. And 5276 can't take it, and then Deli can block 4. Did you happen to concede something like they can go 7 now? No, because Midas is no combo play. Okay. Crazy game. Sorry for silence, just figuring out what my life is doing. So Midas was thinking of something else there. Let's make sure I have the solver right. Oh, how did the game finish? They'll post in the chat. Don't need to get that exactly. So 1, 9, 8, 6. So Midas was thinking 5, 6, 7. Oh. So Midas was considering playing 5, 6, 7, 2 instead of 8 in 4, which was the win. And then Deli wanted to try, because he understood that was terrible for him, the ambitious 6, 7, 5, 2, and 3, which we know doesn't hold. Okay, Midas wins in 2 there. All right, so again, actually, big credit there for Midas, because I was focused on 5, 6, 7, 2, and 2, but 5, 6, 7, 2, and 4 was the way, and Midas was close to playing it. So Midas almost pulls out the win here, instead plays 8, which was bad, and then somehow Deli makes miracles. You guys do good. You guys do good. How did it end? 2, 4, 7 at the end. All right, and the moves there. Oops. Did I just screw up the video? No. Might screw it up for a moment. Just to show the shrine. Okay. We can close the solver. That was all nuts. What a weird game. Oh, and now I have to input the last few moves. Okay. So the order for the end was 5-2-7-6-2, 5-6-6-3-4, 5-6-6-2-7, and 2-7-7-4 remaining. Miracles from Delhi. The man's too good. I've moved a bit away from kind of solverness. For a while, I was kind of like, anytime someone makes a losing move, that's a mistake. That's what we should be counting. And I've moved to instead like, what is actually humanly doable, right? What are we doing here? And in practice, Delhi not only didn't lose this game, but got to press for a win. And in practice, Midas almost found a win when a lot of moves looked very similar. And it was really hard to, I think, identify 4 versus 2 versus anything else. Um, so just triple triad's tough. Triple triad's tough, and you. Yeah. All right. We've talked about style. We've talked about this nutty game. I think I'm gonna end this video. I might try to record the next one as well because I apparently haven't been called away yet. But we've been going an hour, so I'm not gonna extend this one any further.